Excited.
And we're recording. Yours, also.
All right, here it is.
Take it away.
Number 2, second conversation. All right, so want to get right into it? We'll just do a brief community agreements. We talked about it last time. I feel like all those things we can reference from the first time that we talked about. Same thing of like looking for that authenticity of us being able to share openly, and at the same time recognizing boundaries in terms of for ourselves individually, like not censoring from the standpoint of what others might think, but still being cognizant for ourselves of what we feel comfortable sharing, and at the same time exploring that. Some of the other community agreements that we talked about.
Creating our own boundaries for ourselves, not sharing more than we are willing to, not pushing each other's boundaries in ways that might be unsafe or uncomfortable for each other, having fun while we're doing this, even though it's a hard conversation. I think that's most of it.
And creating space for reflection. I think that also goes, there's a lot that goes with boundaries, but that's very pivotal. But I think knowing that this is an ongoing conversation, and that as folks are tuning in and watching this after the fact, that we can check each other, but that burden isn't there of like, you have to check me, I have to check you in the moment, and if it doesn't, then everything is horrible. It's we are in the process and in the journey together, and we are always looking for accountability from our entire community.
Right, and assuming best intentions, of course.
Absolutely.
The understanding that we're coming from a place of learning and reflection. That's where we're coming from. So there might be things that, are not the most appropriate, polished, proper, like the most even progressive, right? We're gonna have to dredge through some non-progressive methods of how we're doing things, or how we're thinking, or how we were raised, and so on and so forth, in order to get to the other side. And so some of our perspectives we might not even know that some of our perspectives are not progressive, and they might be.
Absolutely. That is definitely one thing that I've been learning a lot, for sure. So actually this fits in perfectly with kind of where we're going to take this conversation, our topic today. For this, talked about best intentions. And our first conversation was highly sort of self-reflective, thinking about what conversations we're willing to have and with whom, those different circumstances. And I was kind of going back and rewatching our conversation, because there was actually a lot there that was multi-layered, and it was helpful for me to reflect. But one of the things that we started talking about toward the end of our conversation was you were mentioning about like actively building trust and having intentionality in conversations and interactions, and talking with like family. And one of the things that really resonated with me because of how much it made me feel a lot was that sense of wanting to have a particular conversation, and also knowing that it could cross a hard boundary beyond what is uncomfortable into something that is painful, something that is triggering, something that is beyond what we are willing to engage.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of, we might see that intentionality coming from somebody else, and that helps us to build trust in engaging that conversation. But at the end of the day, it still might be something where the impact of that conversation, the things that are said, because of the fact that they don't know the things, they don't know all the things, or they haven't experienced some of the same experiences, that the things that they say or do might still end up having a negative impact. So what I kind of want us to, what I want to explore and ask you is, we have these idioms like the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and things that remind us that our good intentions are not enough, that our good intentions can have very negative consequences. But just as kind of going back to that conversation of like, we do think about intention at the same time that we are thinking about impact, but what does that look like? So the question that I have is, when do you consider intention over impact in an interaction? Or even if it's not a binary, like it's either impact or intent, when do you take into consideration intention when you're having interactions with people?
Okay, so first of all, I think like that idiom, right? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think it's almost like a motivation for people to kind of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing, you know? I think it's more on the lines of, if you're going to be thinking about doing everything through values and integrity and dignity, you're not going to get anywhere. Like, I think it's kind of a little bit like that. Like, that's how I
never thought of it that way. Okay.
Yeah, that's how I've always heard it.
Ah.
You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get anywhere. And I don't think they're like literally thinking about hell when people say that to us, right? Because it's kind of counterproductive in that case, right? But it's almost like, if you keep thinking about how to do things the right way, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to work within the system. You have to, this is how things are. If you want to get anywhere in life, you have to blah, 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 you know, like that. You have to, if you want to get anywhere in life, you have to grease some palms. You have to, you know, like whatever, forge some signatures. I don't know. Basically, you have to engage in what everybody else does if you want to get anywhere in life. Like that kind of.
Thought of it that way before, but
that's how I've always thought of it.
What? Okay.
I don't
know. Then we will, for the purpose of this conversation, incorrect idiom, but.
I think maybe there's cultural context to it. I don't know. You know, there's possibility that there's possibility that in the States, what you're saying will 100% resonate with people. I've just never seen it that way. I've always seen it in the other way around. Who knows, right? No, but to answer your question, when do you take intention into account over impact?
I don't like the word over because like I don't feel like it's, because it makes it into like this binary. But I think like instead of just focusing on impact, because I feel like there are times where it's like, to me, I feel like impact seems to be more cut and dry, if that makes sense, where it's the impact is so important, like it's so stark that
the intention doesn't matter.
Intention doesn't matter. And I think my question would be more so of like, when do you take intention into account? Maybe not over, but just into account.
Okay, the one group of humans that 100% I always take intention into account regarding their impact is my young humans. They always get intention first, right? Because I know the spaces that they're coming from. I've lived the spaces that they're coming from. Sometimes even when they intend to have that exact impact, I know why it is that they're intending to have that impact, right? Oftentimes the intention is very clear. That's the thing that I love about young humans. Their intention matches their impact more often than not, right? If there is something triggering that happens, it's either because they 100% intended to do it. If there's a negative impact that is had, it's 100% because they intended to do it, or 100% because they did not know. You know, and I know that I'm also, as someone who does not believe in binaries at all, in both the manner in which I live my life and the values that I have, I know that I'm creating a binary over there, but I do believe that about young humans. If they're pushing your boundaries, they're well aware they're pushing your boundaries, right? If they don't know, and because of that they trigger something, they don't know. Now they might not know what they're triggering. Even if it's intentional, they might not know what it is they're triggering, right? But if their intention was to push your boundaries, they are going to push your boundaries. You know what I'm saying? I have mad respect for that because it's so transparent. I can meet them exactly where they are. They're not playing any manipulative games or, you know, constructing anything around what they're actually trying to do. There is no willful ignorance, right? It's clear cut when it comes to young humans. And if I ask them, why would you say that to me? They will tell me exactly why they said that to me. right? There's no playing games. If we're playing games, the game is clear. There's no, oh my God, I did not know I was playing a game. I never meant to be that manipulative. There's none of that. They're straight up about it. You know? And so it's easy for me to communicate with them. Young humans are direct communicators no matter what. They learn the passive aggression. When you call them out on the passive aggressiveness, they revert directly back to the direct communication. It's so simple to have a conversation with young humans. It's so simple to have the most complex conversations with young humans because we don't mince words, right? And so their intention always comes into play for me because then I know exactly what's happening and they want me to know exactly what's happening for the most part, right? Other spaces where intent comes into play when I am conversing with somebody in a problematic conversation, but I'm in the role of program director, right? So when I'm in the role of representing Community Tampa Bay, I purposefully take intention into account. Whereas if it was just Samira Obaid, I would not be taking that intention into account. You know what I mean? Is there a follow-up for that?
Yeah. How do you navigate that switch?
Oh, how do I navigate that switch? Code switching is like
okay.
you live in circles, you live in the multivarious circles that I do. You have to code switch in literal language and figurative language, you know, and metaphorical language, every way, shape, and form. Like you have to code switch back and forth, right? So I feel like that's a little bit more complicated of a switch because I'm always program director of Community Tampa Bay and I'm always Samira Obaid, right? Unless I'm not in Tampa Bay. So when I'm not in this state, you know, like if I'm performing poetry in another state, so on and so, then I can just be Samira Obaid. You know what I'm saying? And that also looks different because I'm a poet in that space. So like my compassion also looks differently in those spaces. I engage in harder conversations as a poet than I do as program director, in the sense that the accountability that I dish out is a little bit harder than the accountability that I dish out as program director. I'm a little more gentle when I'm program director. There's still accountability. It's just the manner in which it's delivered is a less of a whiplash, right? But when I'm in neither of those spaces and I'm purely an activist as Samira Obaid, which may mean that I perform poetry, but I'm not a poet in that space, I'm just an activist, right? Those are the conversations that I will walk away from. Does that clarify somewhat? Yeah?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Why? Because when I'm representing CTB, we make a certain promise to our entire community, meet them where they are, to engage them where they are, right? So there's a certain different responsibility that I bring to the table, right? As a poet, the whole ideal of being a poet in itself is slightly romantic, right? It's romanticized, you know, and so usually in community where there's a lot of camaraderie, there's a lot of love, there's a lot of healing, people are coming to those spaces to hear those words to heal, you know, and so there's a gentleness in that space, there's a compassion, and there's a tenderness in that space, but it is not without limitations. It's not limitations, it's not without limits, right? It's not without boundaries, right? So if somebody steps over that boundary, right, there is definitely pushback. You know what I'm saying? So like if I have, there's a poem that I proudly refer to myself as a dyke, right? And there's a poem in which I refer to myself as a dyke. And there have been numerous times after which I will have a gay man come up to me and tell me, I loved your poem. The only thing I didn't like is the fact that you called yourself a dyke. And I said, well, then it's a good thing you're not a lesbian, right? Like that's typically how I respond to them. I give pushback in that conversation. Thank you so much. It was really nice meeting you. And I walk away. Yeah, because I don't like anybody telling me how to self-identify. I'm also not standing there and telling them, especially to men, right? Like that's a thing for me. That's a red light. That's a red flag for me, right? Telling me how I can and cannot perform my identity. Yeah, so like that's a different space. And then in activism spaces, I'm a lot harder. So, you know, like there's a lot of pushback, right? There's definitely space for conversation, but if you are entering an activist space, I need you to have done the work and I need to be able to see the receipts. I don't have those expectations from the other two spaces. As program director of CTV, I don't have those expectations of people. So when the expectations are not there, it's not that the expectations are low, it's just that the expectations are different, that's all, you know? So as an educational organization too, I think there's a responsibility for the program director to be able to engage in hard conversations with people who don't look like me, live like me, or love like me. Now the impact on me is certainly different, right? But when that is the intention we offer people, then it is my responsibility to meet that intention. And so I have cultivated both my heart and my brain to be able to do so.
I think based off of that, because I think like that's where we could definitely go into all the nuances and like the code switching and everything like that. Right. But I think in trying to sort of go into kind of that more personal space of like, if we didn't have these roles and kind of just thinking about ourselves, not separate from, but like in a sense, I guess like, I like what you said of the piece of authenticity of like, we are authentic in all these spaces, but like without compromising ourselves, but like adjusting to, I guess that's the setting or the circumstances. That I'm not saying it, how did you say it? Because it was really good.
I think that's for like professionalism.
Professionalism, that's what it was.
Yeah, so definition, for me, and only me, definition of professionalism is to be authentic in who you are and in your identity, right? Or how did I define that? I can't remember. Hold on 1 second. I think it's to meet the requirements of the space without ever having to compromise or negotiate your own identity.
It's concise. Yes. So I might be borrowing a little bit from that concept.
Without having to compromise your own identity. Negotiate is different. I think there's more agency in negotiation than there is in compromise. Yeah. Real quick, I just want to point out that we have a 9-minute, I don't know why, but we have a 9-minute warning. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So if it cuts us off, we'll just join right back in and start the recording like we never stopped. Okay, so we don't jump back in and preface anything. We just start right off because we want to maintain that authenticity.
All right. Cool, thanks for the heads up. So I guess like one of the things, kind of almost like thinking about the conversation from the other day, because I think like almost in that space of like being with family or being in our own spaces where we might not be in these other roles, in the same way that like what conversations are we willing to have at the dinner table or in these spaces, in those spaces, how do you, what are those lines for you or what are those boundaries for you in terms of impact versus intention in those spaces? So I think like one of the things that you posed.
Good.
One of the things that you shared was like seeing the intentionality coming from somebody else, and what does that intentionality look like in order for me to consider intent and have that weigh into the way I'm approaching this interaction versus saying, I am not receiving enough. I'm not seeing this intent translate in a way that at all is helpful for me to navigate the negative impact on me.
Well, I mean, I don't think I get to make that decision single-handedly. You know, like I can't create intentions for humans that they don't know I'm creating. So I can't be like, you're not meeting my intentions because I don't know what your intentions are, right? Like there's a lack of consent in that space. It has to be a mutually agreed upon space, right? And so I think that's where we ended that conversation, was who am I to set intentions for other people? You know what I'm saying? But if it comes from a space of, so there's a lot of things to take into context. There's like there's generational gaps to take into context that I'm aware of. There are heteronormative gaps to take into context, or heteronormative constructs to take into context that I'm aware of. There is environmental context that needs to be, or environmental gaps, you know, like I live in the US, they live in India. There's huge cultural gaps between almost like the three of us. Sam, as I live in the US, Sam, who I am in India, and then them, you know, in that space. So there's like a lot of these different things to take into account when having those conversations and deciding what intentions we are creating for people. If you're asking from like a personal standpoint, I think when someone is personally connected to me, intent plays a huge role in how they impact me, right? But I also value a relationship based on how much I can hold somebody accountable without it fracturing the relationship, right? And how much they're willing to hold me accountable without being afraid to fracture the relationship. That accountability both ways is very important to me. And if I feel like I can't trust someone enough to hold them accountable, then I mean, that speaks more to the relationship than it does to intent and impact, doesn't it? You know? So yes, you can. So here's the thing with assuming best intentions. The problem with assuming best intentions is when everybody expects you to assume best intentions of them without doing the work to come from an intentional space. You know, why would you think that of me? I would never do that. You know this about me. Well, if I know that about you, then your behavior also has to match up. You know, but if there is no changed behavior, if there is no conversation around potential change behavior or intent, if there's automatic, same way that I have no right to expect a certain intention from someone, that expectation or intention from someone that I am setting, they'd have no right to do the same either. The assumption of their best intentions is my generosity. That's my benevolence that's coming into play. You don't get to demand assume best intentions from me when you are not doing what needs to be done for your actions to match your words. You know, those are strict boundaries for me. In a personal setting, those are strict boundaries for me. And I adhere to them. And that means I lose a lot of people in my life. I'm totally fine with that. It's definitely a hard boundary to maintain. You really have to get used to removing people from your life when you maintain that kind of hard boundary. You know what I'm saying? But I also like literally have 2.5 people in my life that I trust, so I'm okay with that. And the reason I trust them is because we've been through this before and come out of it multiple times.
Can I know that we're going to be cognizant of the cuts, but I kind of want to explore that a little bit further, in the sense that like our first conversation, we did a lot of self-reflection. I kind of want to use this as an opportunity to have a little bit of a hard conversation about our relationship, since the relationship piece comes into play with thinking about intent and impact, and navigating that. Yes.
Before we do that,
yeah.
While I am aware that you are definitely facilitating the session, I also am aware that this is not a question and answer interview process.
Sorry, yes.
So I could throw this back to you and ask for you to share some of your perspectives and how you handle those boundaries and where intention comes into play when an impact is made or felt. I would greatly appreciate you sharing how you navigate when to take intent into consideration when the impact has had a definitive and certain impact on you, and when to take impact only into consideration, when to do a combination of the both, so on and so forth.
Yeah. So I think for me, like one of the ways that I think about, I definitely feel like intent matters a lot to me, but I think what you said gave a lot of concreteness to what I'm kind of thinking or what I'm feeling, which is that like I think what does real intent look like? You know, in that sense of, are you doing the work? You know, like if you're saying, oh, my intention is this, like you're just paying lip service to something. So I think no matter what, like that intention has to manifest in some way as an impact, you know? So like even if the intention, so and again, like it might be different for me how I'm experiencing that impact or that intent manifesting itself than for somebody else. Because I have different boundaries. I have different needs, different things that I might be looking for in how I value impact on me, and also different identities, right? Like all of that is coming into play. So I think in some ways then like in some ways then if the negative impact is not that great and like I have that luxury, that privilege of the impact not being as palpable as I don't know, strong, then the intent is definitely something where if it manifests in the form of um, care, concern, you know, things that actually do have an emotional impact on me in some way where I still feel valued, affirmed, things like that. Like that those are impacts that I still feel, right, personally. I think where it changes is in thinking about like power. Um, and like when somebody who has a lot of power, um, and now it's definitely like beyond me, right? Their power impacts other people. That definitely feels very, very different. You know, because then the impact is beyond me. Like I don't have that authority to say, oh, your intent is good enough or anything like that. Or even if it's power over me, just over me, I feel like then it becomes something where it's like your impact kind of goes back to that sort of like what is the level of impact that you are having. Then that impact is stronger or higher, you know, for you know overall positive or for negative. And then if it's a negative impact on me, then um, you know, then that intent and like trying just isn't enough at this point because it's like of how much. So I think for me, the reason why power then plays more of a bigger role in my own mind is because of exactly my identities. Like because of my privilege intersection of identities, I don't have to deal with as many microaggressions, um, as many things on a regular basis, and so then power then becomes like actual like sort of institutional power becomes maybe the way that I feel more of those impacts weigh a little bit heavier, and then that's when I need to take into account like start to be more critical about intent in those spaces because I feel like I have the luxury of of being more lax with people's intentions, if that makes sense.
Because there's not a lot of direct impact to you.
It's not as much direct impact. So I think for me, like, and I think that's the thing too, is sometimes this is something I'm kind of personally reflecting on because I think we've talked about this at different times. It's like when people say, oh, like you're so, you know, you're so patient or you're this or this, you know, like compassionate in this way, this way, this way. And I'm like, but I also have the luxury to be, you know, like I think that might also be a factor is like I have the privilege to I have the luxury to take into consideration people's intents because more so in some ways or let them weigh more heavily for me personally because of the fact that their impact on me is not going to be as great in a negative way, you know?
Do you think about impact do you think about intention when there's positive impact?
So yeah, I've been kind of playing around with that. I think it feels different. It definitely feels different. Like it's not like a logical, I don't know, it's not like a logical thing of this plus this in terms of the negative equals this, and this plus this in terms of the positive equals that. But I definitely feel like if there is a positive impact, even if it's unintentional, like that's cool. But at the same time, I think it depends on, in some ways, how much of that intent is integrated for folks. For some folks, I feel like they might not see it as intentional anymore, or it might not seem intentional because it's just kind of part of who they are or how their perspective and the way that they live their lives. Like it doesn't have to be coming from the standpoint of necessarily asking like, how do I create the most, like, I don't know, it doesn't, I'm thinking it might not be conscious. So I actually had an interaction with my neighbor the other day. Definitely keeping lots of distance. I was on the roof. But she was, yeah. But she was talking about how she was like a military kid growing up, and like she moved around like all over the United States, and like, you know, got to see a lot of interesting things and everything like that. And so like she was definitely like, you know, positively spinning the fact that like, yeah, she's seen it all. Like her dad at one point was like, you know, working at Area 51 and everything. So she was like, it's like, I'm like, wow, that's cool. Like all that stuff. Right. So it's like cool stuff, cool stories. And then I just kind of was just like, oh, and like, you know, definitely double-edged, you know, that's really cool. Definitely a double-edged sword though. Like that's a lot of moving around. Like, you know, it's tough, like not having a place to set up roots. And like, I'm not really thinking that through when I'm saying that. And she like paused and she was just kind of like almost like taken aback. And she was just like, I've never had anyone ever say that before. Like most people just are like, oh, that's great. Like you must have had a great, super fun childhood. And it's like, but I went to 13 different schools in 12 years. And like, I never had any consistent friends. And like, as an adult now, like I've lived in the same house for 22 years. And I was like, when I was raising my child, like, I'm like, we're going to stay in one place because I want you to have that stability.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So, but the fact that she had never had anybody else, I guess, recognize that was, you know, not all fun and games. And it was like also challenging. Like there's value in that experience, obviously. And at the same time, like it was not without challenge. But that recognition was not intentional. Like I wasn't trying to have that impact on her, but I feel like it had a much bigger impact than I was expecting, you know?
Right.
But I think like it is definitely coming from an intention of, I want to recognize your experience and I want to think beyond just what is apparent right in front of me or what you're telling me right in front of me. But like, I want to do a little bit more of that work of trying to think from your perspective and experience. But I think in some cases that little bit of effort might have an outsized positive impact.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think there is an intentionality behind it though. It might not be isolated in that singular experience, but there is an intentionality behind living your life a certain way that recognizes and validates the lived experiences of other human beings in general. You know, so you chose to recognize and validate the challenges that she had experienced, right? Within the context of this lived experience that she had. And I feel like that's the intent. And she felt the impact of that. You know, so it might not have been conscious, like you said, but there is a consciousness and an intentionality behind living your life in a way that recognizes people's experience, I think.
I think the challenge, though, is that it is not always consistent, you know?
Sure. Is it not?
I'm sorry?
Is it not always consistent?
Is it not always
Yeah.
I don't think it manifests consistently. Because again, my own experiences and my own identities, like I'm tapping into what I know and what I've learned. And then it's also about what work I'm doing on my own time, because I don't have certain lived experiences. How am I making sure that I am creating that space within myself to explore those experiences so that I'm not putting it on the other person in the moment, right?
Right.
So because of that, though, I think there's a lot of times where, yes, the overall intent might be, yeah, of course, I want to recognize people's experiences and validate and all these things. And that intent isn't enough without the work put behind it. And if I'm lacking in the work in certain areas, then it is not felt as a positive impact. Instead, it is feeling unseen, it is feeling unheard. It's the opposite of what I'm hoping for, because of the fact that my actions are not behind that.
Perhaps it's the opposite, or perhaps it's the status quo.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
Are there experiences for you where you've had to navigate intent and impact with folks close to you? And I will actually use myself as an example. If you feel comfortable sharing, of what is it like to navigate those hard conversations of examining my impact on you or your impact on me, and the intentions or intentionality involved in our interactions with each other?
What is it like to navigate those conversations?
What is it like? That's a very vague question. Yeah.
Very loaded.
Yeah. What is it like? It sucks.
Hard. I think it really depends on the conversation, you know. Let me be very honest with you. Sometimes I don't even have those conversations with you, not because I don't think they're worth it. By all means, they certainly are. But depending on where we are in the year, I just don't have the bandwidth for certain conversations. I just need to feel better. You know, I just need to process through it, forgive, and just, you know, like move on. Not even forgive. Sorry, that's a bad word to use. God, when did I get so puritanical? I just need to process through it, understand where it came from, potentially see it from the other perspective, and then move on. You know, with the idea that maybe we'll come back to it one day, or maybe we won't. Maybe that ship has sailed. You know, so some conversations I don't have because I don't have the bandwidth for it, right? Okay, I'm being so honest about this. It's not that I don't think some conversations are not worth it, but there are some times when I don't see the value in having certain hard conversations. In the sense, you are a man. There are certain things you will never understand. I'm okay with that. You know what I'm saying? I will check you in certain things, but I don't want to have a long conversation about it because you will never understand. I just need you to know that was not okay. Don't do it again. Can we please move on? Right? Yeah. And again, I know that's how I talk. But yeah, some things are just not okay. That's how I talk, right? Sometimes I'm like, hey, what you said, totally inappropriate. You don't talk to somebody who identifies as a woman like that. You as a man can never understand this perspective. Please do not ever reference yourself in understanding that perspective ever again. Are we agreed on this? Yes. Thank you so much. Don't do it again. Let's move on. Right? Like that. So I don't want to have long conversations with, sometimes I'm not the person you need to take that journey with. Maybe there's somebody else. Maybe there's nobody else. Maybe the best person for you to take that journey with is you. You know what I'm saying? And maybe nobody else needs to go on that journey with anybody else but themselves. Right? Because it's a lot. You know, so sometimes it's just, again, like you said, based on your identity, I'm not one of those humans who believes everybody must come to an understanding on everything. Everybody must respect the perspective, especially humans in minority communities. People must respect what people in minority communities have to say. If people in minority communities say no, then just don't. You know, if you say no, you can't use that word, then just don't. Why do you need a justification for it? If a human in a minority community, if humans, a human, a movement, a single person, a child, whoever that person is, belongs to a certain community and says, that hurts my feelings, it's inappropriate, that is racist behavior, it is inappropriate, what is the need for the justification behind it? Maybe you can just stop performing that behavior and we'll all be all right. And then you can go on your own journey as to figuring out why it is that this community feels that way. Why it is, what is the historical reference of that particular word, or those particular words, or that particular act, or this particular fashion statement, or that particular song? You know, find sources of history and go down that path and educate yourself. But in the interim, while you are getting the justification for this particular space, it is not necessary for you to know why. That is, see again, like intent and impact, right?
Yeah, no, totally.
By having a certain impact, recognize that impact and that impact alone in that moment. Nobody's questioning, are you a good person or a bad person? Why? Because nobody's concerned if you're a good person or a bad person. That is not where we're coming from when we're making that request. We are coming from a place of, we are hurt, stop hurting us. It's not about anybody else's, you know, humanness, good humanness, and that there's good and bad also, you know, like when it comes to intent and impact, this idea of good and bad, and somehow one thing makes you a good person and another thing makes you a bad person, you know?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've grown a lot in, is that check on the impact. I think exactly what you said of like, we don't have to have a prolonged conversation, because that's, for me, if there is growth for me to do on the sort of internal understanding and aspect of things, that's for me to do that work.
Right.
And in terms of, I think there's like the disproportionate focus on like, no, but understand my intent though. And it's like, no, that's not about that. Like, just stop the impact, change the impact, work on figuring out how you are going to make that impact consistent.
Right. Because I think when we consistently explain our intent,
mm-hmm.
it is in some ways an attempt to erase our impact.
Mm.
If I tell them how much I didn't mean to do it, then they won't be hurt by what I did anymore. Yeah. You know? Which is why even for like humans who use they, them pronouns or any other neutral pronouns that don't fall on the binary, the number one thing is always, if you make a mistake with pronouns, check yourself and move on. You know, otherwise, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that. I'm a supporter of the LGBTQ plus community. I'm an ally. My brother is this, my son is this, my uncle is this, my sibling is this, my grandfather was that, you know, like all of those explanations as to how affiliated you are with the LGBTQ plus community, and therefore like all of those things put the emotional burden on the person who's experienced the impact, you know. And how do you put the emotional burden of your intentions on someone who is directly affected by what you did? That person is already hurt, and now you're saying hurt some more. So the explanation of the intention is really so much more harmful. Or rather, I won't say so much more harmful, depends on the situation, adds to the harm that the impact has already caused. You know, now I have to convince you that you're not a bad person. In this moment where I'm actively experiencing pain from what has happened, now I have to convince you that you are not a bad person. How did this job suddenly become mine? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
And that's like totally tangential. I mean, I feel like we went somewhere else with what you were asking.
No. I think this is all related. It's all related.
But in conversation regarding the two of us,
yeah.
How do I navigate intent and impact? Right. That's
but I think, but yeah, and I feel like that was a really good answer though. And it brought up a lot of really good points that. It also is helpful to kind of, because in the moment I'm like, I have to constantly remember for myself that I'm like, how much of the impact am I seeing versus not seeing? You know, like even if I don't see an impact in the moment, how much of that burden is just being taken by somebody else who is doing the processing on their own to avoid further negative impact without me doing the work on my own as well, you know? So I think like that's something that.
How does that work for you though? Because we know I'm not good at sharing my emotions.
But I think that's part of it is like, I think not sharing, like actively sharing emotions, maybe in terms of like, I am feeling this. I'm going to have, you know, I'm going to tell you exactly this and write you a letter. But, you know, but I think like that's the thing of like, I think the perceptiveness, right? That's something that I've been continuously trying to work on, but like, it's helpful to be reminded of it. We know this from interacting where like literally in the middle of a youth conference, like you'll be trying to mouth something to me and I'm like, what? And I'm like, absolutely like not paying attention to like, I'm just like, oh, this is not the appropriate time for me to do this. So like definitely like that absent-mindedness, right? That kind of just like not paying attention. But I think that's part of that intentionality piece is what does intentionality look like when it is manifesting as impact is not saying this is my intent and let me justify this and all this, but it is I think part of that is trying to anticipate the impact on other people ahead of time and being perceptive. And that is something that I've noticed that I've again, I think I do it and I only catch it a few times, right? Of the times that I do it. And when I have caught myself and when I bring it up, those have been kind of like moments of healing to some degree where it's like, or at least something of like, at least acknowledging the impact. I guess it depends on the situation though. And I guess that might be kind of like a final thing is like, at what point does, not justifying, but at what point does acknowledging impact play a role in moving some of these conversations forward and having a more positive impact on each other, on other people?
Before that.
Sorry, yeah.
Your question for me.
Mm-hmm.
How do I navigate intent and impact when it comes to you?
Yeah.
Vice versa?
Vice versa.
Why is this a question and answer session?
I know. I'm sorry. Hey, my bad.
Real conversation.
Yeah. How do I navigate it with you? It took me some time. It took me some time to navigate it with you. I think it took a lot of repetition from you, honestly. There was, I think one of the things that is, and this is a personal thing, clearly is like how do I navigate my own sense of worth? And a lot of it is definitely rooted in other people, like acknowledgement or affirmation from other people, right? Like how other people see me is important. And I think like that's very challenging when it comes to that space of how do I be held accountable when then that accountability, if I'm tying that up with this sense of I had this negative impact, therefore I'm a bad person, or have like now the intent is coming into it, and I'm like now trying to find a way of like centering my intent as opposed to the impact and focusing on the impact. So I think like one of the things that was pretty powerful was you were very clear with those boundaries, with sharing, I will always call you out on that impact piece. And that clear separation of like, I will call you out on that impact when I need to, or when it's, and at the same time, there was a constant feeling of trust that you were cultivating with me, where I felt that it's not that it wasn't even about me at a certain point. It was just the fact that you were like, I will always support you. I will always have your back. And I think like that level of sort of like, it wasn't tied to my worth in a sense. And then so as a result, then it was like, this is somebody who I can trust in terms of navigating these conversations, and in terms of impact, it would make it so that things that were challenging or hard definitely felt less challenging and hard or less painful and more challenging, if that makes sense. Like more growth oriented as opposed to like a shame spiral piece. And I think wrapped up in that is the modeling of what does it look like to take initiative in holding yourself accountable. I think that that's something that helps a lot in navigating intent and impact, because then even if there's an impact where I'm like, I feel any type of way, I think that intent in the relationship is constantly there for me to feel a strong foundation of like, Sam is doing the work, so I should be doing the work too, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I'm also going to recognize there's a lot of positional power in this space, right? So even when I'm throwing the question back to you, I want to recognize this and course correct a little bit, yeah? Even when I'm throwing it back to you to ask how you navigate intent versus impact with me, intent and impact with me, there is this automatic assumption that you're talking about, there's this automatic assumption that I'm seeing and I feel like you're making, that it is your intent, your impact on me, and how you are navigating that. Right? Let's talk about my intent and my impact on you and how you navigate that as well. Because yes, I am your boss, but this is our organization of 3 people, right? We strongly believe in circular leadership, which means if you are having an impact on me, I am certainly having an impact on you as well. So this one-sided way of thinking is not really realistic. From an identity perspective, I would see why you would come from that space, right? But there are multiple identities at play. So let's keep that in mind, yeah?
Sure.
And you brought up power.
I did bring up power. I think that's where the modeling piece comes in. Is because I know that you reflect and hold yourself accountable, and show humility. Like there's like the fact that like you have apologized to me multiple times and I'm just like, what? You know, like it's like very much like, what do you have to apologize about? But like even that piece there's so much, there's that modeling there that allows me then, and I think how I navigate it is definitely has changed over time. So I think before I was definitely a lot more, I would say, in terms of navigating intent and impact, I think I didn't really consider the intent from your standpoint. I don't think I fully understood intent. I think I was much more focused on impact. And I think it has changed because the relationship has changed, if that makes sense.
Shema?
Makes sense, yeah. Like I think in terms of impact, if I'm feeling hurt by something you said, then I think before it was much more like an internal shame spiral of like, oh my gosh, I'm so hurt. And I think now it has changed because of how also like how much you model humility, how much I've changed, how much we've changed. Where I think now when I think of intent, it allows me to, think differently about different kinds of impact. And at the same time, this goes into, I'm trying to think, this goes into power again.
Go into it.
I might have to think on this a lot more. Hold on. Okay, Sam. Whew.
Is it bothering you to talk about this?
No. I'm like, why haven't I gone into this yet? Oh shoot. Okay. So I'm thinking about where I'm at right now. I definitely think I put a lot of emphasis on intent. I think with impact, when I do put emphasis on impact, or when I did put a lot more emphasis on impact in some cases, it would be entirely internal for myself, as opposed to like, it would be like a shame spiral sort of thing of like, oh my gosh, the impact, blah, 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 blah. And then it ends up not being helpful for me, like growing oriented for me. And I think now where I'm at is at a place of like, I am highly considerate of intent, or no, maybe not highly, but I'm more thinking about intent because I feel like I also know you and trust you better. And I think that that plays a big role in intent, but I want to explore more, what does that look like now in the context of how do I navigate power? Because I think that is still something that I think I'm going back to kind of what you said of like, this might be another separate hard conversation video just about power.
Yeah.
How do we feel about that?
I feel good about that.
I think that that's something.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because I think about it, and I can't remember the last time you checked me. Is that a power thing?
It might be.
Dang. You can't trust someone and then not hold them accountable to their behaviors, man. Can you? Like, is that healthy trust? I don't know. Like,
yeah.
Also subjective, right? Like, so
yeah.
How I see it might be different from how you see it.
True.
But for you, is that if because of my organizational power over you, you have felt the need to more lean toward my intention than my impact, in conjunction with who I am as a human being, maybe, right? Like, so in conjunction with, what are the things you said? Humility. Yeah, all of those things that I'm uncomfortable saying. Whatever, humility, modeling, blah, 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 right? All of those things. In conjunction with all of those things, even if it's just those things, still shouldn't prevent you from holding somebody accountable for their impact. You know, me apologizing to you for something that I did does not excuse me from a second behavior that I performed that has impacted you negatively, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, if I apologize to you today and then I do something really crappy tomorrow, yeah, but she apologized to me yesterday for the thing that she did, so she recognized it. Why should I check on the thing that she did today? Well, because that was yesterday, this is today. You know what I mean? I don't know, like, does that excuse it? And is it because those things plus my organizational power that prevents you from holding me accountable? Because high affirmation, high accountability, where's the accountability? Yeah. Dang, man, that's like, that's not cool from my end either. I'm definitely doing something wrong.
I definitely want to come back to this and pause on it. Because I don't want to, commit to like, this is what this is. Because there's a lot here. Yeah, there's totally a lot here. So I'm going to do some more reflection on it. I think kind of what I was saying earlier too, though, of kind of going back to, because I'm looking at power as one of the things, because definitely like power, I have like a weird relationship with power, right? Like, I think we know this. And so, so I think like there's something to explore there potentially. I also feel like I do still feel like there is some validity in thinking in terms of identities and privilege, in terms of sort of like that, thinking about like, what is the privilege I have of having leniency in terms of intent versus impact, you know, based off of my privilege, right? So it's like, because I'm also thinking about other folks in my life who I might not hold accountable in certain ways, or check their impact on me, because I'm focusing more on intent. And it's because of the fact that I am looking at what is my ability to be lenient, or not lenient, but what is it, flexible with how I see or how I factor in intent in impact on me, Because I think, again, coming back to, like, for me, intent and impact matches still to some degree, where it's like, no matter what, the intention manifests itself for me personally in the form of impact, depending on the person, right? And so I think, there is a difference between, like, accountability in terms of things that are actually like, this is a problem, this is incorrect, versus what are some things that, for me personally, it's like, this might have had a little bit of a negative impact on me, and how much of this is me leaning into intent because I have that, I have the luxury of doing that. That makes sense.
It makes sense. It also sounds a little bit like white saviorship.
Possibly. Mm. Mm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think, okay, using identity as a play, okay? Using identity, sorry, not as a play. Using identity as a measure, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I am actively making the decision to not engage in specific areas of your growth because of the emotional burden that it puts on me,
Mm-hmm.
you are actively engaging in not investing in specific areas of my growth because you don't think I should be subject to that because of the privilege that you enjoy in other spaces.
Mm. And there's no agency there.
Did I ask for your flexibility?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if it's, I'm being super real, okay? If it's, you're my boss and I'm worried if I hold you accountable, there will be consequences to it. If that's the case, because of positional power, right? Then I really need to do better at my job. But if that's not the case, and it is Sam has to put up with so much crap in the outside world that I don't, therefore, in this space, where we make a commitment to each other for high affirmation, high accountability, I'm not going to engage her in one piece of it because I don't think she needs to lean into that. Then I see that as, do I get a say in this? You know, like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm going to do some more. I'm going to think a little bit more on that.
Yeah. Because if it's a positional power piece, then, and if you choose to share with me at a later time, you know, once you're done with reflection, then there's definitely some work that I need to do. Right. But again, like, that's also accountability. So I don't know how that conversation has had. You know, like perhaps thinking about things like when we check in every week, should I ask you about the impact that I've had on you? Tell me one thing I screwed up, Maso, this week. Are there more things that?
So negative.
Huh?
That sounds so negative.
Well, you screw up, you screw up. I mean, come on, what?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily phrase it that way when I'm talking to you, but I am phrasing it that way when I'm talking about me, because like that's for me, that's how I do it, right? So I'm just like phrasing it from like my own accountability process. But if I was to ask you, tell me one way I've negatively impacted you this week. Tell me something that I said to you that I should not have. Tell me an action of mine that has impacted you in a way that needs to change. You know? Perhaps if there was more of an invitation, it would be easier to do.
Let me think on this.
Cool.
But yeah, I feel like structures definitely are helpful. Just as kind of like as tools, just as with community agreements and with everything else. Like.
Yeah. At the same time.
I wanna.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you first.
No, but I want to explore this first, just because I don't. I think there's multiple layers to this, and I want to kind of sort this out, and then before delving a little bit more deeply with you.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. There's at minimum 2 different conversations that are happening here, right? One that's based on your privilege and one that's based on my power. If it's based on my power, then it's my work to do. If it's based on your privilege, then that's your work to do. Yeah. You know? Right?
Yeah.
And then there's other layers, of course. I'm just stating 2.
Yeah. And it could be both.
And it could be both, yeah.
So this is not where I was expecting this conversation to go, but this was very very helpful in reflecting.
Yeah. I always struggle with adults when it comes to accountability.
Yeah.
I always struggle. Like, I don't have a lot of people in my life that will hold me accountable. And I know it's especially difficult for staff, because I know I can be intimidating. I'm well aware of that, right? And I know that intimidation comes from respect, and sometimes in the social constructs of our world, we confuse respect with fear, and there's just a lot of things, you know? So I feel like I don't get held accountable very often, except by who? My kids. You know, like they really call me out on everything. You've seen them. I don't think so, Sam. You've seen that, you know? They don't, that's what I'm saying. Like they're not, they haven't been steeped in all the crap that we've been steeped in, fortunately, right? They're just starting to learn those things now. And I think they're starting to figure out which relationships to allow those things to come into and which relationships not to. You know? So, yeah. But I'm excited to hear what you have to say, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Strange turn. Are you feeling okay? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm gonna definitely. These are definitely hard conversations.
Mm.
Dang. Did not. Okay.
I expected that's why I asked you that question, because I expected the accountability piece, because I know you don't hold me accountable, you know? So I expected that piece of it to come up. I didn't expect the leaning into intent more because of your identities. That I didn't see that perspective at all. Yeah.
I'm gonna, because I want to consider. A couple of things before,
yeah. All right. Cool.
All right.
Yeah. How do we want to end this?
I don't know. Is this okay to end it just like this?
Does it feel awkward to you? Feels a little bit awkward to me.
It feels a little bit awkward. I think we talked about action steps. I'm going to do some self-reflection.
Okay. Cool.
I think that I'm going to do some self-reflection. I think figuring out sort of sorting through sort of the layers there so that like we can explore, whether it is something for each of us to explore in different ways. If it's for me to explore on my own, for conversation to have with you. And how do we want to have, like, I feel like this has opened up a lot of other conversations. Do we want to put this onto the docket for future hard conversations?
Sure, depending on like where we land in our reflection, not depending on where, like if we are willing to do that after our reflections. Yeah. I think we need to open that space as well. I know for me, I know it's a yes, right? I think like there's a little more reflection space for you because you're talking from an identity space. I'm not.
Yeah.
Like I'm well aware that I'm an intimidating human being, right? And I can create the action step of I will try not to be so intimidating, but I'm not going to. That will be a hardcore lie because my intimidation is also very intentional. So if identity comes into play, right? If identity comes into play, my positional power is the only power that I have that's technically higher than yours. Right? In the world at large. Yeah? All of your intersecting identities, all of my intersecting identities, there's not an equal plane where that sets. Maybe with masculinity.
Masculinity goals, yeah.
Huh?
I said masculinity goals, yeah.
Yeah, so maybe there's like a differential as far as that is concerned, right? But I'm not going to be any less intimidating, you are a straight man, living in America, blah, 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 right? Cisgender straight man living in America, who's American, all of that jazz, right? So I am not opposed to the fact that you are intimidated by me. It doesn't make me feel some type of way. I don't feel like my positional power needs to be subdued by any means. Like in my identities to be in this position, it's a big deal for me, and I hold that position with a lot of pride. You know what I'm saying? Not about to limit the strength of my character because of a cisgender straight American man. That's not going to happen, right? At the same time, there is positional power in play. Yeah? That is mitigating you being able to hold your boss accountable.
Maybe.
Potentially, yes, potentially. And if that is the case, then it is my responsibility, without compromising my identities, it is my responsibility to navigate that so that to provide the platform based on which you can work through whatever it is that is preventing you from holding me accountable. So the identity piece of the work you'll have to do. The structural piece of the work I can put into it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know, like it's a strange space because I know you, who you are as a human being, I want to take on more responsibility, but in the larger context of the movement and identity and systems, it will be responsible of me to take more responsibility for you, given everything that we just talked about with positional power and then all of the other identities.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll reflect. If we decide to do this as a separate hard conversation, we can. After reflection, if we want to take it offline, we can do that. But yeah, we'll see where this goes.
Are you comfortable if I leave that decision to you?
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Yes. You good?
I'm good.
Okay,
good?
Breathe in,
Breathe in.
breathe out. Thank you so much, Shahim. That's a lot of space there, man. Thank you so much for opening it up like that, you know?
No, thank you. This is also, we were trying to do is make it shorter. I don't know how short this actually is. It's not.
Nope. Mm-mm.
Okay.
All right.
Well, all right. Well, thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
Of course, always. Okay. Can't wait to talk more about this.
Yes.
All right, awesome.
All right.
Alrighty, bye.